Hi, my name is Matthew Saunders. I'm currently the engineering lead for healthcare providers portal with Pfizer. I've been doing open source work for about 20 years, and Drupal for the last 10 years, roughly. And I've made my career pretty much on project management and shifting companies from being largely waterfall through a process of going into Scrum or Fall, and then ultimately moving those organizations into full Agile methodologies. So what I'm going to be talking about a little bit today is what I have learned from the different companies that I've worked with over the last 20 years, and at the end of it, I think what you're going to find is that I subscribe to Agile methodologies more than anything else, and I think it'll make sense once we get there. Even though my title is engineering lead, that's not really what I do. What I do for Pfizer is communication between the business and the engineering team. I do a lot of translation, making sure that people understand what it is that they're supposed to build in terms that make sense to them, and make sure that the business units understand what it is that we actually are building. That includes doing some technical architectures and so on, but I actually don't touch a line of code. I haven't touched code at Pfizer at all. So it's weird, and it doesn't quite fit, but that's the title they gave me, and there you go. I've worked on lots of different large systems, including Examiner.com. I was hired to do the migration from Drupal, rather Cold Fusion to Drupal 7. Drupal 7 really didn't exist at the time. It had been committed to head something like 7 or 8 weeks prior to us starting to work on it, and my team there was responsible for about 18% of Drupal 7 core. That was an incredibly exciting and frustrating project all at the same time. I'll talk a little bit about that. I'd encourage you to get in touch with me if you want. I can be reached on Drupal.org at Matthew S. And my Twitter handle is at Creech if you want to find me on Twitter. So I'm going to start out by talking a little bit about outliers. Have any of you read the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell? No? Okay, so one of the things that he talks about in it is that in the 90s there were commercial airliners that were just crashing. Nobody could figure out why. There wasn't anything happening in terms of bad weather. There wasn't anything happening in terms of mechanical failures. But there was an inordinate number of commercial airliners that were falling out of the sky. Nobody could really figure it out. I want you to think about that as we go through the presentation, because I'm going to come back to it at the very end, because it really does have a lot to do with the kind of work that we do as project managers. So why do we do what we do? We work in project management for successful outcomes, and as an illustration of this, I put out to the interwebs a call for people to send me their horror stories, and I got probably about 50 different stories from folks. A lot of people just complained about things like support for modules and concern about undocumented code and stuff like that. But there were 3 client stories that I thought were really good and illustrates why we should be engaged in project management. So the first one, I had a client a couple of months ago called me at 6:30 in the morning, yelling and screaming because his site had been down for over an hour. I dragged myself out of bed, get to the computer, and his site comes right up. I told him to get onto Google, and guess what? According to him, Google was down as well. I politely told him to call his internet provider because that was down, and once his internet came back up, to use it to search for a new developer. So this is pretty common, and really what it comes comes down to is a need for trust and empathy between the development team and clients. Clients often don't have the skills, the tools that they need to be able to talk to us in an effective way, and so our job is to make sure that communication is working correctly and that messages are getting back and forth, and there aren't miscommunications and confusion around what the heck is going on. What this comes down to is that we need to be active listeners, and it's really hard for us often because here we are, a bunch of introverts. And it becomes really difficult for those communication lines to be in place. If you've got a really good project manager in place, that can help take care of that an awful lot. All right, the second one. I had a project that had multiple decision makers. They wouldn't move forward unless they agreed on any one point, and they couldn't agree on anything. So this is a crippling kind of experience. Has everybody had this experience where you've got a client and they just can't decide, and you feel like saying to them, "Look, nobody's going to lose an eye if we make this if we make a mistake here. Nobody's going to have their arm cut off. Nobody's going to die. Let's make a decision. Let's move forward. And if it's not the right one, we can always go back and we can change it." But if we stop here, what you're going to find is that your project just isn't going to move forward. We're going to run out of time. We're going to run out of money. And then the last one. I had a client who didn't know what they wanted. They spent endless hours in meetings throwing around ideas. Despite warnings that they're consuming their contracted hours in this fashion, they insisted that they shouldn't have to pay for the time that the site, because the site hasn't yet been built. Anybody had that experience? So this comes down to having expectations around process and making sure that a client really understands that there are points in your project where they actually have to be present. They actually have to be involved. And it's really common for a client to say, "You know what? Here, go take care of it. Tell me when it's done." And that doesn't work. You inevitably will end up with bad results if you don't have an active, engaged client. But all this speaks to planning, communication, process, focus, and differences in culture. And if you don't figure out these five elements, particularly the cultural differences, we end up with poor outcomes. Our clients are, I'm going to have to go back to that previous slide. Sorry about that. Our clients are contact experts in their fields, but they don't necessarily understand a lot of the terms we use, like block, bean, context, variable. These things mean different things to them than they do to us. And because of that, you can find yourself in a position where you're talking to your client and they literally have no idea of what you're talking about. So you have to build a mutually understood vocabulary. So project managers, like I said earlier, they're translators. And as we get into talking a little bit about Agile, what we'll discuss is how Agile can help bridge those communication gaps, because in Waterfall it naturally sets things up for communication to break down. So, you're looking for a paradise of concordance, you desire understanding, and you end up, you panic and slip into nightmares in these situations where the communication isn't right. Our partners, internal and external, they bring us to an open sourced Arkham, and we feel the call of Cthulhu. Everybody know H.P. Lovecraft? Yeah. So you might find this familiar. This is the emotional state that you find yourself in when the client is throwing around different contrib modules that you know won't work. The place where the client assumes that something's easy or won't take much time, but that's never true. The place where you wonder if you're actually going to get a chance to build something, and you realize that the project is in a constant state of flux. Change is norm, predictability is evaporated. Our job is to communicate, to translate, to mediate. Our job is to unblock. It's to bring calm from chaos. Our job is to make everybody else's jobs easier. It's to simplify things that are complex, break them down into small bite-sized chunks that everybody can get their arms around and understand. And if we're being successful, there'll be times when things appear to be running so smoothly that people might ask, Why do we have project managers anyway? Don't be fooled. Because our job is the cat herder. And not just of developers, but it's also themers and product owners and business owners and clients. All these people need to be kept, just sort of nudge them this way, nudge them that way, in order to make sure that the project is running smoothly. Our job is to keep communication running, keep the ducks in a row, and above all else, we need to make sure that developers are avoiding pretty shiny things that distract them. Developers are a bit like magpies and crows and so forth. They're incredibly smart, but easily distracted. So what we need to do is make sure that everybody is on the same page. Everybody is is in lockstep in terms of what you're working on. You have to help. So I got a question for you. How many of you in the middle of a coding sprint have been asked by a client to just add one little thing? It's going to make everything so much better, right? And then they ask for another thing, and another thing, and another thing. And suddenly all these little things have blown up your budget, right? Your timeline's blown. So what I call the 5 lethal words are, how hard can it be? And the moment I hear that, it's the red flags are going, right? The klaxons are going off, and you've got to find a way to get your client back into line, into what it is that you're actually supposed to be building. Again, this comes back to how bad Waterfall is for these kinds of projects.
I'm sorry, Waterfall?
So Waterfall is a project management methodology that's used to build bridges, F-15s, dams, anything that you can't have something go wrong in. You're gonna do planning, so much planning up front, so it's very clear as to exactly what it is that you're gonna build. Really bad for software though, because it's right. Software changes, and projects change. When a client comes to you and they start saying, I want a website that follows hockey scores. You might find that halfway through, they want hockey scores, but they didn't tell you that they also want baseball and they also want lacrosse, right? So it makes for if you've done all that planning up front, then you've wasted a bunch of time that could have been used actually coding and showing and reviewing. Yeah. So, who here can tell me why manhole covers are heavy and round? Yep.
Oh, am I the only person?
You're the only one. Heavy and round.
They're heavy so people won't walk off with them, and they're round because that way they won't fall down.
Right.
Into the hole.
Right, exactly. And they're there to protect people from falling, right? We're kind of like manhole covers. We're there to make sure that people aren't making mistakes and falling down into a pit that can hurt them. As project managers, we need to anticipate these dangers, and we need to react and help our teams avoid risky behaviors. And it behooves us to use clear communication to prevent ourselves, our clients, our colleagues from falling down these dangerous holes. So one of the things that I think is really important to note is it doesn't matter whether you're doing Waterfall, Agile, Scrummerfall, Kanban. The 90% of our job is communication. It's not the tools, it's not the methodology, it's making sure that people are really clear and that words mean something. And then finally, in terms of this little thread, we need to be listening for underlying messages, listening for unspoken messages. Because often a client will say something to you, and you might think that it is clear as day as to what it is that they mean, but they mean something completely different. So what I find myself doing when I'm working with a client is engaging in active listening with them. So I ask questions, even if I think I'm absolutely clear on what it is that they want. Because often when you start teasing out those little elements, you find out that they didn't even know what they wanted. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about 3 different methodologies that I've used over the last 20 years. And I've used them with varying degrees of success, but all of them have sort of led me to a place where I've engaged organizations in changing from Waterfall to Agile methodologies. So the first is Cowboy. Cowboy, does everybody know what Cowboy programming is, or extreme programming? Not everybody? Okay. So,
Fast break stuff.
I beg your pardon?
Move fast break stuff.
Yeah, move fast, break stuff. It's great if you're building a prototype. It's fabulous if it's a group of people that are trying to figure out how to build something, get it to market quickly. It requires a giant amount of trust between the stakeholders and the developers, because you're engaging in rapid iterations, and you can end up with huge miscommunication around expectations. But the neat thing is, because it's so highly informal and it focuses on the stakeholders, it can be excellent for that kind of work. Now, in a weird way, I ended up using Cowboy on one of the biggest projects I've ever worked on because of some things that happened. So, as I was saying earlier in the talk, I worked on Examiner.com. I was hired to come in and help them migrate from the Cold Fusion to Drupal 7. When I arrived, I was handed requirements, like 5 giant binders like this. And I said, okay, well, I need to go away and I need to digest this, because they wanted to know, how long is it going to take, how much is it going to cost? So I went away with the binders and went through the requirements and discovered it was the most un-Drupal-y thing I'd ever seen in my life. They had ignored the fact that they had decided that they wanted to work on Drupal as a platform, and basically it was going to require that we rewrite everything, because the way that they wanted to use sorting, taxonomy wouldn't work the way that they described it. The user authentication system that they had described wasn't anything like Drupal. So, you're sitting here looking at this and going, well, is this really what they want? So I built a Gantt chart, because they wanted, I had tons of requirements. It was very clear what they wanted to have built. It was about the size of that screen there once I was finished with it, taping it all together and so forth. And I went into the conference room with the leadership and I said, I've got great news. I know how long it's going to take. I know how much it's going to cost. And I know the resources that we need. And, they said, okay, well, what is it? And I said, it's going to take us 18 months. We've got the core group of developers that we need right now, but we're going to need 3 or 4 other people, and here are the people that I recommend. And the room went silent. It was so awkward. So I'm sitting there, it's like crickets, and okay. Anybody going to say anything? At one point, one of the vice presidents held up her hand, and she said, Matthew, this has to be done in 7 to 9 months. And I looked at them and I said, okay. And I picked up that stack of binders, and this is where I put them. Right in front of them. And I said, you're going to need to trust me. I can get you to launch in 7 to 9 months, but we cannot do anything that you've put into these requirements. They don't make any sense. So what we're going to do is we're going to prototype. We're going to rapidly iterate, and every day you're going to have to give somebody authority, but I need somebody who can make decisions, and every day we're going to be looking at this product and we're going to be iterating. We're going to be changing. We're going to be continuing to develop. So it was literally like having 1-day sprints until we got to the platform to a point where we could go into week-long sprints and then finally into 2-week-long sprints. And at 8.5 months, they had a site that they could launch, albeit they were still using Cold Fusion for the publishing side of things. So we had actually a continuous migration going on for about 4 or 5 months after that, which was a headache. That's another story altogether. But we met the deadline that they'd stated because business was willing to trust the fact that we as developers, as a development team, were going to get them to the place that they needed to get. So Cowboy for projects like that, if there's trust, can be really effective, but it's also probably the most dangerous and chaotic way to develop a product. Waterfall. So that sacrifices that kind of speed for predictability, right? So you've got all those requirements. It's very clear what you're going to build. You front load all that work, and then you go through a very set of milestones. And at the end, if everything's gone right, then you've got exactly the product that folks expect to see. When I started at Pfizer, all projects were waterfall. My first project was to rebuild the educational system that they've got, the video educational system that they've got, and it was yay big in terms of the requirements, and they'd already chosen a vendor that they wanted to use for the video and so forth. That proved to be challenging because, requirements change. And I'm going to ask a question of you. Have any of you ever had a project that was in Waterfall that the scope didn't change, that the requirements didn't change? Right. So you go through a series of change orders, right, to catch up, which really means that Waterfall doesn't exist. It's a pipe dream. Like no development company on the face of the planet is actually working in Waterfall, even if they think they are. So some people may disagree with me, but I don't think that Waterfall works very well for software development, and I think that it really doesn't work well with Drupal projects because constantly we're getting new community code that's being delivered, and that actually can change the way that you're dealing with a project. Plus, if your client is smart and they're willing to listen to you about what community code is good and what community code isn't good, they could get 80% of what they're looking for without anybody actually writing a line of code, right? So when you get into a situation with a client where they do have a bunch of requirements and they aren't Drupal-y, it means that you're ending up doing a ton of custom stuff, which is pretty much a waste of time. The other thing about Waterfall is that often requirements are dictated. It's not a collaborative effort. So we become order takers, almost like hamburger flippers, as opposed to creative individuals. And at the end of the day, writing software is a creative act. And I think people like it when they're in a position where they can exercise that creativity. This happened at Pfizer. We ended up having a lot of change requests on different projects, and slowly but surely there was a recognition that this was probably a wrong-headed way for us to be working. So in Waterfall, there can be a tendency for the client to become impatient because you need to plan everything up front, and you may end up in a position where the client is telling you to plan, but hurry up. So you feel a little bit like these people on the boat, except that the engine isn't working, and you're slowly but surely heading over to the edge of the waterfall. So I believe that rather than fight change, you need to embrace it, and that requires that we weave, that we move, that we're flexible. And there's this myth that Agile means that there's no planning, that there's no structure around it, and that's absolutely not true. There's predictability within each and every time box. We'll talk about time boxes, stuff like that in just a minute. But there's predictability inside of the time box that you're currently in. Pfizer's moved from Waterfall to Scrummerfall, so where we did a bunch of requirements up front, but then did things in time box periods. A lot of agencies do that because clients tend to want to have a sense of what it is that they're going to have at the end of the development cycle. And most recently, we've moved to pure Agile, where the business has said, "Okay, we trust you. It looks like you know what you're doing. We're gonna give you a bucket of money, and we just want you to work through the backlog." Agile has defined time boxes, iterative development methods. It's incremental. It's collaborative. It's rapid, flexible, and responsive to change. And you use self-organizing teams. So, for the rest of the talk, I'm just going to talk about Agile. Time box. Time box does not refer to a ship that can move through space and time. Time boxing is a way to contain risk. So by putting constraints around a period, maybe 2 weeks. Pfizer, we used 2 weeks. When I was at Examiner, we did 4-week sprints. But by putting a constraint, a time constraint, you can break things up into smaller bite-sized chunks. And if you're doing Agile right, at the end of each sprint, you've got workable code that can be used. And ideally, you're in a position where that code can be demonstrated to the client, and they can see things happening. They can see things working. A sprint. So a sprint is planning. Is that period where you're planning your stories from the backlog. They'll fit into that development period. Developers code, stakeholders test. You deliver the code. An epic is sort of the idea of a overall large deliverable. So you might have in a site that you're working on an epic that is a blog or an article type or a video platform, something like that. And typically an epic is written in the same way as user stories. I'll go into user stories in just a second. But typically an epic is going to go over multiple sprints, not just a single sprint. User stories are a way to define experiences. So you structure them in a way like as a role, as a person. I want to do something so I can have something happen. So it might be something like, as an anonymous user, I want to log on to the site so I can have a personalized experience. Or as a member, I want to post to a forum so I can get feedback from other members. Stuff like that. If you write user stories in a structured way, you can do it in a language called Gherkin. And if you do that, then you're in a position where those stories can actually become automated tests at the end. If you're working in a system where you want to do automated regression tests.
Gherkin?
Gherkin, yeah, it's called Gherkin. And it's structured pretty much like user stories. And anybody can learn to write in Gherkin. It's quite easy. It's just you have to follow very very specific structures in order for it to work. The other sweet thing is, if you write your user stories correctly, they become your acceptance criteria with your client, and you can say to the client, "Look, you helped us write these, and does such and such do what it says that we said that it would do?" And if the answer is yes, then it's past that litmus test. And if they want something different, then you simply say, "Hey, you know what? That's great. I really love this idea that you've got. Let's get it into the backlog." Scrums. So every day you should have a stand-up. And that stand-up, no more than 15 minutes. The idea is that you get your team together and you talk about what you've done in the last 24 hours, what you're going to do in the next 24 hours, and what blockers you have. And the idea is that if there are blockers, you figure out who needs to talk to whom in order to unblock that problem. But you want it to be quick, and you want it to be daily, even if you feel like you don't have anything to talk about. Big part of that is getting into the habit. And finally, in terms of these kinds of conversations, I have client check-ins at least once a week. In the latest iteration of what I'm doing with Pfizer, we actually have business owners and product owners sitting in on our scrums every day as well. They don't say anything; they're not supposed to say anything, but at least they're hearing what it is that we're doing, and we can get with them aside if we need to, and continue that communication. So, yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Have you initiated a project with just Scrum with external clients?
Yes.
And if so, where do the requirements fit? Do you iterate through the requirements
Yes.
phases, or do you do a planning meeting upfront?
So you do a little. The way that I've handled it in the past is a short planning meeting up front. But when I was at Design Group, we shifted from most of our clients from being Waterfall-y kind of or Scrummer-Folly kind of experiences to Agile, and it requires that the client up front knows exactly what it is, how you're going to develop. So I worked with a group called the Marketing Research Association, and they had a general idea of what they wanted their site to do. They had an old site, and we did quite a bit of thinking up front in terms of doing content auditing and talking through what the features were that they'd like. But what we did was we wrote out a bunch of stories with them. We got them into a backlog, and we said, look, we know that we've got 8 sprints to work with you. We're not going to get through all these things that you want in 8 sprints, but we're going to get through a lot of it. We need you to actively help us groom that backlog every sprint. And once they bought into it, it was incredible. We actually got through like 80% of the backlog, and at the end of it, they were like, "This was awesome," and they kept buying sprints. So it ended up being like a year and a half engagement where we just were making things better and better and better every sprint.
Have you ever turned the requirements phase into a sprint?
Yeah, it doesn't really work.
Because you're not delivering at the end of it.
Right. You could call it maybe a pre-sprint, I guess, but it doesn't really work. What ends up happening then is you actually are engaged in Scrum or Fall at that point, which is fine. I mean, that works great for agencies if they need that, if the client needs that level of confidence at the beginning. But I maintain that you can bring way more value to a client using Agile than you can ever bring them if you're operating in Waterfall or Scrum or Fall. So, like I said, once a week at least with the client, make sure that they know what you're working on, make sure that they're engaged, and you really want them to be involved in the ceremonies like the backlog grooming meetings and the retrospectives and so forth. So I'm going to talk a little bit about rules. Scrum Masters, they schedule the ceremonies. Those are like the grooming meeting, your stand-ups, retrospective at the end, demo. They take care of all of those. They lead in pointing, so that's the estimation process of figuring out how big something is relative to other things. They act as defense from distractions, so their job is to make sure that the development team isn't being pushed into a direction that they shouldn't be in. They help teams avoid mistakes, and they manage the schedule. Product owners own the backlog. That's the list of items that you're going to build. And as I said, in the case of the association, they knew that we weren't going to get through all the backlog, but they had the power to determine what it was that we're going to work on next. They also own the personas, epics, and stories. So I want the product owner and somebody in the business unit actively helping me write stories, and that helps them understand what it is that's going to be built and reduces the amount of confusion that you might have at the end of the process.
What's a persona?
So a persona is you create a fake person who represents each of the kinds of people that you might have come to your site. So if you're building a university site, for example, you might work up a persona of a student, of a teacher, of a parent, for example.
It's like idealized users that
right.
are the protagonists of epics and stories.
Right, and basically you use that as a lens by which you write your stories. So you're writing your stories specifically to those people and the ways that you think they're going to use the website. Product owners also clarify business needs. So often business requirements are really confusing, and we need the product owner there to help us understand what it is that they actually want us to build. Just recently, I had a situation where the stated requirement for a little project was we want to have 2 different session timeouts. We want one on the main site, so when somebody logs in that it's 2 weeks. But if they go to their profile page, because we're dealing with healthcare providers, we want it to only be 15 minutes. And I went through back and forth with them until it became clear that that's actually not what they wanted. What they wanted was a 2-week session length. But if somebody went to their profile and left the computer with the profile up, after 15 minutes, they wanted it to automatically log out. They thought they were telling us the right thing, but they weren't, and it took communication with the business owner, with the product owner, to get that sorted out. Ideally, the product owner also will do demonstrations of the software to everybody else in the company, if
Sort of like an internal champion. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about roadmaps and backlogs. We've started using this piece of software at Pfizer called AHA. And the neat thing about AHA is that it allows you to have people go in and put in their ideas. Their ideas end up in this backlog where it's all kind of undefined stuff, but separate from the rest of the stuff that you've actually defined here.
Is it similar to Trello?
No, it's different.
Okay.
So we use Jira for our actual project management. This is managing a backlog. So it's managing all the features that you think you might want. And in this case, Barium was one of our code names for a release. And so as we decided what it was that we were going to add to the to this particular sprint, it got put into Barium and tagged, and estimates were put on it, and so forth. The really sweet thing about this is you can have multiple backlogs essentially, and you can work with the business unit to point things in a way that is different than any other pointing system I've ever worked with. You can define business difficulties, you can define developer difficulties, and you can define opportunities, that kind of stuff. And then on each one of these points, the business unit will say, okay, this has X amount of business needs, so I want to point this at a 7 out of 10. And you know what? If it's not so important for us to have a really great back end, so I'm going to put design at a 3. And then developers might come in and say, okay, so this is a really tough problem. Like Drupal doesn't do this naturally, so I'm going to put this at a -17. And when you get through all of it, you've had a conversation, you've changed the nature of the way requirements are sorted out. You've had a conversation. You may actually have simplified things through this process, and you've got a list of features that actually are pointed based on level of difficulty and importance to the business.
You can pretty much do the same thing on the Kanban boards on Jira, can't you?
No, not quite. So. For example, at Pfizer, there are 18 different variables that we work through, and it's the business unit, it's a product owner, it's developers, designers. So we have 4 different groups that are putting their own scores based on their needs, their specific needs, right? Because at the end of the day, the designer really doesn't care that much if it's really hard to develop, and the business unit is definitely not going to care if it's really difficult to. But we want to have all those variables included in our decision making. Then once you've got it in something like Barium, you press a button and it pulls it all into Jira. So suddenly you have your sprint set up in Jira automatically for you. And the API allows AHA and Jira to actively talk to one another. So if you update something in Jira at that point, AHA will receive that update as well.
I'm sorry, I don't know that tool. Can you spell that?
AHA.
No, the other one.
Jira?
Yeah.
Yeah. JIRA. It's a project management tool that
Okay.
probably 70% of developers at this point use. Yeah.
So are you spending time pointing out all the ideas or just the things that have been pulled into that sprint?
Just the things that we're pulling into the sprint.
Yeah, because you initially mentioned that people can just put their ideas in.
Yeah.
But you then take the step of putting them in the sprint and then you spend the time pointing.
So with ideas, you'll go into the ideas board and then you'll say, okay, these 5 look really interesting. I'm going to put it into the regular backlog. And you just use a little pull down and then it moves it into the regular backlog. And at that point you can start to define what those ideas are going to be.
Right, I just want to make sure
Yeah.
you're just pointing out the stuff that you're actually
Yeah.
going to work with.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
So there are a few things that you need to be thinking about as you're going through your planning for a sprint. And a big part of it is information architecture. So I like to do a rough sitemap even at the beginning of a project, even if I know it's going to change. I like to get wireframes in front of clients. It may only be one little section of the site that we're building at that point, but I like to do that. Get the user stories written up. Ideally, having a Drupal architecture in place is helpful. There's a Drupal module called Cinc, C-I-N-C, that will allow you, if you've done a spreadsheet in a very specific way, a Google spreadsheet in a very specific way, it'll allow you to actually set up all of your content types, all your taxonomies, everything from that spreadsheet. It uses the Google API to pull those in and basically do your initial build of the site. Really, really, really useful tool. Then with design, we workshop with our designers and make sure that they are understanding what's easy and what's hard in Drupal. They're responsible for doing comps and mock-ups at that point. Our developers self-organize the stories. They communicate expectations of what can be completed in a sprint, and they define how the business needs should be architected and executed, and then they execute on that. So a sprint model. We're going to assume a 14-day sprint for this, and I break it down into 1 day of planning, 8 days of development, and 1 day with user acceptance and demonstrations with the company. We work in small teams. We have a lead developer, back-end developer, front-end developer, Scrum Master, who helps the team get their work done, and then we also have our business unit, the product owner and the business owner. Small teams make for very efficient development. You can turn things around really quickly. On the last day of Timebox, we do a company-wide demonstration of what the team's built. And the reason that we do this is because it helps the entire company know development status. It builds respect amongst the different teams. That's really important. And trust. Everybody knows how to use the product or where to go to find somebody who can help them use the product. And then directly after that, we do a retrospective, which is just our development team. We want to figure out what we did well, what we did badly, and then we iterate our process. So Agile, once you adopt Agile, that doesn't mean that you've stopped doing the work. You're going to find that things work for you and other things don't work for you, and you want to iterate on your process. Constantly challenge the assumptions that you've made. Okay. So the toolbox. I like we are a distributed team, so we use Slack. I've used other tools like HipChat, Skype, IRC in the past with other companies, but basically what you want is a logged channel that you can communicate with your team if you're a distributed team. Even if you're not a distributed team, it's often very helpful to have these logged channels because somebody can ask a question, and if it's not urgent, it can just sort of sit in the channel for a while somebody is finishing the work that they're doing, because distractions, again, once you get distracted from what you're working on, it can take a ton of time to actually get back into what it is that you're concentrating on. We use Google Docs a ton, and the reason that we use Google Docs a ton is because the business unit understands how to do spreadsheets, and they understand how to do documents. We have Confluence along with Jira, but we found that the product owners and business owners really sometimes are challenged with a wiki. So a lot of our initial thinking happens in Google Docs, and then we'll ultimately move things over into a Confluence where we'll attach those Confluence pages to Jira tickets. And Confluence has become our de facto knowledge center. I've already talked about the fact that we use Jira. Basically it goes through a workflow of to-do, in progress, internal review, client review, and done. Once tasks are moved to a client review, we can point the client to those particular tickets and have them go through the process of user acceptance testing on those tickets based on those user stories that we talked earlier. Time tracking is super important, particularly if you're an agency. Currently, we use a tool that's brand new called Hub Planner. You might want to check it out. It's pretty neat. It allows you to do resource planning as well as time tracking. Prior to that, we used a product called Timely App, which was pretty good. It didn't allow you to do resource planning, but it was pretty good. It had great reports in it. I've used Harvest in the past. Harvest also has really good or relatively good resource planning tools in it. And of course, if you want, you could just use Jira and the time tracking in Jira. There's a plugin for that if you wanted to do that. If you don't do time tracking, you're going to find yourself in a place where you aren't effectively able to plan, because your estimating is going to get better and better and better as you sort out what was easy, what was hard, and so forth. So when you first start doing estimates, pointing and so forth, it's wildly inaccurate, but you get more and more accurate as you practice it. So there are a whole slew of tools that you can use, but I think it's really important to note that the tool set you use isn't as important as designing a process that works for your team. And it comes right back to transparent communication. So, back to the book Outliers. Remember what I said at the beginning. A number of commercial flights were falling out of the sky. Nobody knew why. They just seemed to be failing for some reason. There wasn't mechanical problems. There wasn't inclement weather. So does anybody want to hazard a guess as to why this was happening?
Probably pilot schedules.
Nope. Anybody else? So prior to about 1995, 1997, there was a strict hierarchy in all airlines that was adhered to, and the pilot was the top dog. So if the co-pilot or the navigator were to notice something that was going wrong, their expectation was that the pilot would know this already if it wasn't in their purview. So they weren't communicating. The hierarchy had put them in a position where they were completely stymied. And when this was discovered, when they figured out what was going on, that people weren't talking to each other, they changed the way that the hierarchy is set up, and basically gave permission to teams to talk to one another in a more effective way. It's crazy, right? Like, that makes no sense. It makes no sense. So first officers and engineers weren't eased to speak directly to the captain about their concerns, and essentially what they did was what we do with our Agile teams. We made the team flat. So when you're working in an Agile team, you want to make sure that everybody has a voice. Everybody's ideas are valid. Everybody has an expertise that they are engaged in, that they can work with, that can improve the product. It's much easier to identify risks and unblock problems when feedback is built into the system via scrums, war room, retrospectives, and it's absolutely critical that you define a culture that eliminates blame, allows people to own mistakes, allows people to ask for feedback, and that has everybody listening to one another. One of the really fun and cool things about Pfizer is we have a yearly team meeting where everybody from all over the world on our team all ends up in a single place, and we have a prize every year for the worst screw up of the year, and that we celebrate it, and we celebrated it because these teams that we're working on actively look to support one another. They're actively always engaged in trying to help other people fix things. And it makes for a situation where people aren't afraid to say, uh-oh, I messed up, I need help. That if you can get to that sweet spot, it makes a huge difference in terms of the effectiveness of your team. So what this, for us, this means that we were working faster, more better, and producing awesome products. We were able to deliver working code more quickly. We aren't overburdened by specific requirements, and we focus on business needs, trusting that our Scrum teams will deliver products that fit the needs of our clients. So thanks. Any questions?
Are you gonna post this to?
Yeah, it's being recorded, and they'll put it up on the Badcamp site. Yeah, and I'll get my slides, and I'll make sure the slides are on the yeah. Any other questions?
You mentioned there was a tool that we're using where you would produce all your content types from a
Sync.
spreadsheet. Just SYNC.
It's CINC.
CINC.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a Drupal module. It was developed by Atten Design Group, and it's pretty sweet. Yeah.
I couldn't tell, were you referring to product owners as someone on the internal or on the client side?
On the client side. Yeah.
Do you have internal product owners or do you not?
So that's an interesting question because in my current situation, everything's internal. When I was working in agency land, we tried to have a product owner on both sides. Yeah. All right. Well. Oh.
Yeah, I was going to say, because like one of the challenges that I think we find at our company is on paper we're using Agile, but then there's still all these expectations from our management and from client and the client's management that at the front of the project they want all the requirements, they want a sprint plan that shows this is what's going to be done this month, this is what's going to be done this month, and the whole thing's going to go live on this date. And so by the time we add all these expectations on, we're back to Waterfall.
Yep.
It sounds like you've had some success moving a company from Waterfall to Agile.
I've moved 4 companies from Waterfall to Agile.
Yeah. And it sounds like you've had some success with that. Do you have like any bullet points or things that were helpful moving the company in that direction?
The biggest thing, to be absolutely honest, is changing the expectations of the clients that you're bringing on board. And if you can build into your proposal and contracting process expectations around how you work, then the client's actually buying not just the software, they're buying the process. I've definitely been in positions where I've gone, maybe we don't want to work with this group, like, because they are bad clients, right? You can be in positions where there are terrible clients that drag you down, that they aren't. It's not productive. It's not good. When I was back in the agency world, we were actively trying to find clients that were interested in an agile methodology. And the cool thing is that more and more people appear to be understanding what agile is